This is a video tutorial for the Happy Days Snowdon beanie style hat. And this is how you make it. You will need 2 pieces of contrasting fleece. I've actually used a couple of fleece throws that I bought from a shop. Before you begin cutting out, you need to be aware that fleece fabric stretches more in one direction than the other. For instance, that stretches really well, but this way, no stretch at all. Take your first piece of fleece, and I've already checked that my stretch is going the correct way. Fold it in half as I'm doing. Then take your template and where it says cut unfold, place this edge of your template against the edge of your folded line. Take some fabric weights and then carefully draw all the way around your shape of your template. I'm using a heat erasable pen. After you've drawn round your template, add a few pins as I've done and cut out all the way around your line as I've done. And repeat for your other colour fabric fleece. Open out your pieces and you will have 2 pieces of fleece like this. Next, take 1 piece of your fleece and place it on top of your other fleece. Line up the edges and add a few clips along this edge. I've added a few clips along the bottom and I'm now going to take it over the sewing machine and use a 1/4 inch seam allowance starting at this end, sew all the way across the bottom. You'll need to change your stitch length. Maybe practice first to see which is the best stretch length for your sewing machine. On mine it works best on a number 4. I've sewn using a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way along the bottom edge. I've also changed my stitch length to a 4 all the way along. Now I'm going to open it out. I've opened it out and I'm now looking at the right side. Next, I'm going to take this edge and fold it right over to this edge. I've folded it over and now I'm going to ensure that this seam and this seam match up. So open up your seams a little bit on both of them and then add a clip to secure. As I've done. I've added further clips along this edge. Next, starting at the top using a 1/4 inch seam allowance and a size 4 stitch length, sew carefully all the way around. It'll be a bit lumpy over your join, but carry on all the way down until this point here and stop. I've sewn from the top point all the way down using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I've also changed my stitch length to a 4 and I've sewn right to this point here. I'm now going to add some clips from this point here all the way down to where the fold is. I've added a few clips And now I'm going to take it over the sewing machine and starting at the top, use a 1/4 inch seam allowance, stitch length 4 again, sew carefully all around the curve and keep sewing just below the cut line and stop. I've sewn using a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way down to the fold. Now I'm going to do exactly the same to this end. I've added some clips and now I'm going to take it over the sewing machine and start at the top as we did before, using a 1/4 inch seam allowance and a stitch length 4, sew all the way down to the fold. I've sewn from the top point all the way down to the fold. Now we're going to open it all out and twist it over. So put your hand in and carefully open it all out like so. I'm now working on the fabric that will become my outer, the grey. So using that seam and that seam, ensure that they match up and then add a clip. Now I'm going to continue adding clips around this curve. I've added some clips this side and now I'm going to do exactly the same for this side. As we've done before, exactly the same, starting at the top, using a 1/4 inch seam allowance and stitch length 4, sew all the way around the curve to the fold. Then once again, starting at the top, using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, stitch length 4, sew round this curve to the fold. I've sewn all the way around, and next I'm going to work on the fabric that will become my lining. I've matched my centre seam and added some clips as before, and now I'm going to take it over the sewing machine and starting at the top as we did before, using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, sew all the way down to the fold. This is why I said this is going to be the lining part, because we're going to be leaving a gap. I've added some clips and starting at the top, sew along to the edge where you're going to be leaving the gap and stop. Then start again once you've left a gap, and as we've done before, sew all the way down to the fold and stop. I've sewn along, remembering to leave a gap, and it's through this gap now I'm going to turn the hat the right way out. I've turned it the right way out, and the last bit of sewing is to sew up the gap. So tuck your fabric in so you're not seeing the raw edges, and then add some clips and then sew carefully along the gap. I've sewn up the gap, and all that's left now is to tuck the lining inside the main outer. I've turned it the right way out, I've sewn up the gap, I've turned up the brim, and that's your Happy Days Snowdon beanie style hat all finished.